Christmas Day is nearly here, the presents are wrapped and the stockings are hung, the cupboards filled with festive treats. Around this time of year, I often think about those, throughout history, who were unable to be with their families on the 25th, and spent that day on the front lines, not in a gaudy festive jumper, but in olive green fatigues and webbing. The myth and legend of the Christmas Truce in 1914 spring to mind when we think of soldiers coming out of their trenches and walking across no man's land, singing carols, lives long in the memory. And although not unique to 1914, men shared pleasantries and unofficial ceasefires were upheld by pockets of British and German troops. It remains one of the enduring cultural touchstones from the Great War, and was even used as a basis of a Christmas advert in the UK by the supermarket Sainsbury's in 2014. Another item that's synonymous with the Christmas truce are the Princess Mary gift boxes. The boxes were supplied as part of a public fund, which the young Princess Mary headed. It's estimated that over 2.5 million were produced from October 1914 and were delivered not only to British Army and naval servicemen, but prisoners of war and casualties of enemy action. The brass boxes contained 1 ounce of pipe tobacco, 20 cigarettes, a pipe and a tinder lighter, a Christmas card and a photograph of the princess herself. A version was also created for non-smokers, which replaced the smoking ephemera with acid tablets and a writing case, paper and envelopes. The boxes were prize items for the men that received them in 1914, and being airtight, were useful for keeping personal items safe from the dangers of trench warfare. In the Second World War, in 1941, the Ministry of Information film called Christmas Under Fire was produced, which detailed the plight of the British people who had endured the Blitz of 1940, and was presented and narrated by journalist Quentin Reynolds. Although it primarily documented the home front, the film acknowledges all of the fighting men serving overseas in the North African campaign. Speaking of the war in the desert, in 1941 the NAFI was on hand to assure that all British units received all the typical Christmas fare they could supply. In Christmas 1944, they organised a camel convoy to provide Christmas puddings and tinned chicken and mincemeat to a remote unit stationed in an oasis some 600 miles away from the city of Benghazi. O camel ye faithful indeed! The men of the British Army Postal Service would work overtime to ensure that troops would receive letters and parcels from their loved ones. For instance, the Army postal workers in Tobruk in 1942 undertook 18-hour shifts to make sure the Christmas mail was sorted in time. By the winter of 1944, the Allied forces in northwest Europe had almost pushed Hitler's troops back to their own front door, as the war seemed all but won. But on the 16th of December 1944, the last true German offensive against the Western Allies was launched, and would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. Battle-worn American and British troops were thrust into some of the hardest fighting of that year, as they tried to stop the German advance. Snatching a moment to write home on the 29th of December 1944, Lieutenant Otts of the 26th Division wrote, "If it hadn't been for the fighting, it would have been one of the most beautiful Christmases I had ever spent. I had never seen such a white Christmas, nor such a beautiful country. The rolling hills, the snow-covered fields and mountains, and the tall, majestic pines and firs really made it a Christmas I'll never forget." Over the same period, but situated further away from the fighting in the Bulge, the 1st 5th Queen's Royal Surrey Regiment were holding the line outside the German village of Vere. They were joined by BBC war correspondent Frank Gillard, who observed their festive celebrations. He also recorded a message with veteran soldier Corporal Bob Pass of D Company of the 1st 5th Queens. Corporal Pass's words were broadcast at 2 p.m. on Christmas Day 1944 to millions on the wireless back home in the UK, in a programme called The Journey Home, broadcast just before the King's speech.
And then the journey home did start. Over North Africa, into Tunis, across the Mediterranean, into Italy, and a hard bit of the journey there, and still going on. Then back home again, but again just to start another journey. Quietly over the sea the night before D-Day. Journeying home with our backs to home. The beaches, Normandy, France, Belgium, Holland, and at last, Germany. Yes, a long road.
The hard fighting on the Bulge in 1944 and the subsequent Rhine crossings in March of 1945 meant Christmas 1944 was the last one of the Second World War, but it wouldn't be the last time troops were stationed overseas during the holidays. In 1965, the US Army had 185,000 troops in country in Vietnam. The troops in this footage are stationed at a base in Tan Son Nhut in South Vietnam. This footage was captured on the 7th of December 1965. The men open gifts from home and decorate a tree with beer can baubles and shaving foam snow. As well as the Americans celebrating Christmas in country, their Australian allies also celebrated away from home, having joined the war in force in the same year. The Australian Army Doctorate of Public Relations produced a series of recorded messages with Australian military personnel for broadcast on Australian TV back home. These messages are taken from 1967.
Merry Christmas, Victorians, especially my wife and children, the families of the members of the 7th Battalion and my many friends. We think of you all this day, and particularly at this time. As many of you know, the 7th Battalion was raised and trained in Victoria, and we feel a very special bond with the people of Victoria. During the 9 months we've been here so far, you've given us a great deal of moral support, and we do appreciate this. In fact, moral support to a unit, that is a unit as a whole, is just as important as mail is to individual members. Now this Christmas, for many of the lads of the battalion, it will be their first time away from home. And of course it won't be the same sort of Christmas that they have been used to. We will do our very best to make it a day to remember for them, and we will set up Christmas decorations, and with the help that you've given us with the Christmas parcels which have been sent, I think it will be a day to remember.
As the big day this year draws ever closer, please spare a thought for the brave fighting men and women of Ukraine this year. After almost 10 months since the Russian invasion, they'll be fighting through the festivities like countless troops throughout history before them. Merry Christmas to all my subscribers and viewers, and a Happy New Year. If you enjoyed the video, the best Christmas present you could give me is a like and a subscription. Thanks, and I'll catch you next time.